I am going to keep that up. All right, let's get started, shall we? I All right. So, welcome. Today's webinar is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, helping youth achieve #relationship goals. I was really excited to come up with this webinar title, um, just because it's fun and it's a little dorky, and probably is going to embarrass any sort of teen who might be watching this webinar today. So I'm sorry about that. But this is a webinar designed for any adult who has a young person in their lives. So caseworkers, parents, teachers, coaches, guardians, like all that good stuff. If you have a young person in your life, this is the webinar for you. So thank you for being here and for your commitment to helping these young people, helping our future be one of healthy relationships. So again, this is a webinar from Women's Advocates. If you're new to Women's Advocates webinars, welcome. We're happy to have you. If this is not your first time at a Women's Advocates webinar, welcome. We're happy to have you. Women's Advocates is a nonprofit organization in St. Paul, Minnesota. We offer a continuum of safety through prevention programming, like these webinars, emergency shelter and support and advocacy services for victim survivors and their children, and then aftercare housing support for victim survivors of domestic violence. We started in the early 1970s as a legal advice helpline for women seeking divorce. And by 1974, we'd purchased our first safe home to shelter abused women and children. So in the almost 50 years since, we've expanded, and now we provide emergency shelter for up to 90 days for up to 15 families at a time. You can learn more about us on our website. I won't do the whole spiel today. So before we begin, I'm going to launch a poll. Just tell me where you're coming from, what sort of work you're doing now, what sector, because there are a whole variety of reasons. There are a whole lot of reasons that we're here. And I want to know about that. While you're answering that, I'll give you an overview of our agenda. So first, we're going to define teen dating violence, its prevalence, warning signs, impacts, and why it is so important to have quality conversations about it with the young people in our lives. Then we'll talk about content, like what goes into those conversations, right? What do those conversations look like? What should you say? And then finally, we are going to discuss how those conversations can help us cultivate supportive, authentic relationships with the young people we love. And now for the poll results. Looks like we've got a pretty healthy mix. We've mostly got folks who are working at domestic violence and sexual assault programs, and a good chunk of victim survivors here as well. I made it multiple choice because victim survivors come from all fields. We can be survivors and agency workers. We can be survivors and youth workers. We're not just survivors. We're out there working in the world too. So wherever you're from, thank you for being here. I'm so happy to have you. Now let's get into it. So what's teen dating violence? How prevalent is it? What does it look like? And why is it happening? Let's talk about it. When I define domestic violence in more adult-focused presentations, which is most of what I do is with adults, I spend a lot of time emphasizing the fact that domestic violence can happen outside of a romantic or sexual relationship. So parents, roommates, adult children, other close relations can and do perpetrate domestic violence. But teen dating violence is specific to a romantic or sexual relationship. We don't call it domestic because usually the teens involved aren't sharing a home, usually. Young adults ages 18 to 24 can also experience dating violence. We're just not calling it teen dating violence because they're not teens. Anybody in a dating but not cohabitating, not living together relationship can experience dating violence. but we specify teen dating violence when both parties are under 18 or when a person under 18 is being abused by an adult partner. I say partner in air quotes because you can't, I mean, children, young people under 18 cannot consent to a romantic or sexual relationship with an adult. So that's teen dating violence. Are there any questions about this definition of dating violence before we get into the statistics? We talk about teen dating violence as a pattern of physical, psychological, or sexual abuse, harassment, or coercion, or stalking used by one person ages 13 to 18 to exert power and control over another in the context of a dating relationship, whether that is currently happening or happened in the past. Any questions about that? All right, well, let's keep going. And if you do have questions, I'm around. Okay. Oh, we have a spotlight issue. Yes, please. Spotlight for everyone. I'm going to pause and spotlight our interpreters again real quick, okay? So bear with me. Thank you. All right, can we all see Aaron? Can we all see the interpreter right now? Can you put that in the chat for me? Can't see the interpreters. Shoot, when I'm talking? Okay. That's so strange. Continue. I'm going to spotlight everybody. Okay. Now we can. All right. Thank you all for bearing with me. Zoom. All right. So let's talk. These are the warning signs of abusive behavior, and this is when I give presentations in high schools to young people. I like to be very clear about the warning signs of abusive behavior and give them a list of questions that they can ask themselves about their relationship. Because a lot of times when you just ask somebody, are you experiencing dating violence? They're going to say no because they don't know what that means. Especially teenagers who are just getting into romantic relationships, maybe for the first time. They don't know what behaviors constitute abuse and what behaviors are acceptable. So it's really important to give people a concrete list of questions like, does your partner show jealousy of your friends? Does your partner discourage you from spending time with people who aren't them? Does your partner threaten you or intimidate you or pressure you? I give those concrete questions because it's not something they always know. They don't know what behaviors constitute abuse all the time. And so we need to give young folks clear instructions and clear questions that they can use to determine for themselves whether things are on the up and up in their relationship. So some of those warning signs are isolation. If a young person is being kept from spending time with their friends and family, from going to outside activities, that's isolation. We have harmful criticism. If somebody that a young person is dating is constantly berating them and telling them they're a bad person, they're not doing anything right, there's constant blame, always that this young person is the source of the problem and not the person who's actually doing the abuse. There's harmful anger, manipulative jealousy, intentional sabotage, like hiding your car keys so you can't go to work, so you lose your job, or hiding, maybe somebody in a teen dating violence relationship could hide your letters from colleges asking, like accepting you to college, or encouraging you to apply to this particular college. Somebody could take that information from you to sabotage your potential college prospects. And then there's excessive control and strategic intensity. So those are some of the warning signs and some of the questions we use to get teenagers thinking about whether there are signs of abuse in their own relationships. And then prevalence and impacts. I mean, February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, which is a time when we recognize that 10% of teens in the United States experience dating violence. That's 1.5 million high schoolers every year. So even if the young people in your life aren't going through it, chances are they know somebody, they know a young person in their life who is going through it. And we're not inventing a problem. This is for real. School age teenagers are experiencing abusive relationships. A study by the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia revealed that rates of dating violence victimization begin to rise at age 13. They rise sharply between the ages of 15 and 17, so during high school, and then they continue to rise between ages 18 and 22 during college. So there's that immediate jump between ages 15 and 17, and that's where we really want to go. We really want to start having conversations with folks who are about 13 because that's when that huge spike starts in dating violence. As adults, we might dismiss teen dating violence as shallow drama, as like high school stuff that people get over eventually, but it is abuse and it has really serious consequences. Teens who experience dating violence are at a much higher risk than for depression, substance abuse, eating disorders, STIs, a much higher risk for all of those than non-abused teens. And they also, if you experience teen dating violence, you're more likely to experience further victimization in your adult relationships. Um, and half of the youth who have been victims of dating violence or rape attempt suicide. So that's 50% compared to 12.5% of non-abused girls and 5.5% of non-abused boys. So this is a huge problem. It's very serious. And we have a whole month for it. Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month is put on every February by Love is Respect, which is a program that encourages healthy relationships in young people. It's run by the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and it's a specific youth-oriented program. This year's theme is talk about it. So it's a call to action for youth and the adults in their lives to talk about their experiences with dating violence in caring, supportive, and real ways. We need this call to action because these conversations aren't happening. 81% of parents believe that teen dating violence isn't a problem. It's not an issue. And one statistic that just really blows my mind is that 2/3 of teens, so 66% of teens in an abusive relationship, never tell anybody about it. They don't tell their friends, they don't tell their parents, they keep it all inside. And that's really got to change. That's really damaging. So, what I want to know, I'm going to launch a poll. Have you ever talked about dating violence with a young person in your life? We're going to talk about like what those conversations look like later. But I do want to know, are those conversations happening? Give y'all a couple seconds to answer the poll. All right. Looks like by and large, 75%, 74% of folks have had a conversation with a young person in their life. 21% saying no, and 5% don't know any young people. That's okay. You'll encounter them, and we want to give you the tools when you do. All right. So I'm going to keep these two statistics up. That 81% of parents who believe dating violence is not an issue, and 2/3 of teens in an abusive relationship never tell anyone about it. I'm going to keep those up. because I want to talk about it and I want to hear from you. I know a lot of us have already spoken to young people in our lives about dating violence, but it sounds like, based on these two stats, by and large, parents and teens are not talking about this. They're not talking about dating violence. And I want to know if that's a new trend. Um, so, do these two statistics fit with your own experience of being a teenager? I want to know in the chat. Um, when you were a teenager, did the adults in your life talk to you about this stuff? Did adults in your life talk to you about dating violence and sexual assault and healthy relationships? How did it feel to bring up stuff like that? How did it feel to bring up topics like sex and dating to your parents? Or would you have rather died than talk to your parents about that stuff? A lot of folks never talked to their parents about it, or when they did, it was accusatory. Okay, good. One person whose mom's very open about relationships and sex. A lot of folks who are saying, no, that was never a conversation. Let's see. Man, everybody's having a hard time. Someone says, yes, we did have this conversation, but it was really harsh, so hard to be open. Most folks are saying, nope, never spoke to their parents or family about dating violence. If you didn't talk to your parents about that stuff, who did you talk to? Think about, like, when you were a teenager, who was a safe person for you to have these conversations with? Okay, somebody's got a really good high school guidance counselor, friends, yeah. And that is still, like, that's still pretty common. I know a lot of teenagers don't talk to their parents about this stuff, but they'll tell their friends everything. Let's see. Yep, my parents would have spoken to me if they knew about it themselves, but they didn't have the tools or knowledge. That's huge. A lot of parents know that this is a problem, but they just don't know how to talk about it. So it's really important that we give tools today. Yeah, somebody learned in the street, like, yep, absolutely. Talk to friends who also didn't know anything. Yes. Okay, so thank you all so much for being so open about how this all worked out when you were a teenager. Because it shows me that not a lot has really changed. We're all still, like, teenagers are all still having these conversations with each other and not with the adults in their lives who might be able to provide some more accurate advice, some more compassionate information. I know in my house, I never had these conversations. I don't think we ever even said the words dating violence or healthy relationships. It just didn't happen. We didn't talk, we didn't even mention it. And so I didn't know that dating violence even existed until I went to college and was like, oh my gosh, all of these people I know are in these abusive relationships. Why is this happening? My parents only spoke of it from the perspective as if I was guilty. So after the first time, I never said a word again. Yeah, I think a lot of adults can be really accusatory in their language when they're talking about this stuff as to their young people. They get really accusatory, and we're going to talk about how we can avoid that with the young people in our lives so we can sort of start to break that generational cycle. So we agree we're not having these conversations as often as we should. And we agree that it's important to talk with young people about dating violence and healthy relationships. But that's a really wide umbrella of stuff to talk about. So let's get into the substance of the conversations. What are we talking about when we talk about dating violence? if you're nervous, or if you find that you're nervous or sweaty, or you're thinking about talking to this teenager in your life like you're a soldier thinking about going off to war, like slow down. You might want to change your approach. Nobody has to dread these talks. Nobody should dread these conversations. They don't have to be serious. Conversations about healthy relationships should be taken seriously because they are a serious issue. But serious doesn't have to mean joyless. They can still be approachable conversations, lighthearted conversations. And it's not just one and done. These are ongoing conversations with your young person. So you want it to feel good. You don't want to just get it out of the way. I think adults put a lot of pressure on themselves to get everything right in this one conversation. And they get so focused on how important this conversation is that their delivery becomes really severe. And that turns kids off. They're like, oh, you're way too intense about this. I don't like it. I feel attacked. I feel accused. And unless there's a disclosure happening, like unless a young person is telling you, hey, I'm experiencing dating violence, or hey, I was assaulted, or this thing happened to me, it doesn't have to be intense. Like if somebody is coming to you and saying, hey, this is happening to me, I'm having a hard time, please help me. I mean, you keep that serious tone because that is serious. But unless that's happening, you can have informal, fun conversations. You might be able to weave them into routine activities. Like you can have these conversations while grocery shopping or at the gym, or just do something really fun and special. And it all doesn't have to be focused on behaviors to avoid, things that you shouldn't do, the trauma of dating violence. Like, obviously, tell the young people in your life that, like, this is hard stuff. It's hard to go through. It's not fun. We should be avoiding behaviors that make other people feel unsafe. But this is also an opportunity to help this young person that you know and love explore what they want in life. This is an opportunity for young people to imagine and think about what's important to them, and how they deserve to be treated. That's good stuff, and your tone should reflect that. And so I do want to know, like, when you have had these conversations, or when you've had serious conversations about any topic, where and when do you have those? I know somebody is mentioning having these conversations in the car, um, which I agree can be very helpful because then kid doesn't have to make eye contact. But I will also say, as somebody who grew up having very serious conversations in the car, I automatically tense up, um, when I get into a car with like my mom, because I think I'm going to get halfway down the interstate and she'll say, "Okay, Mary Beth, we need to talk," and that's when I just want to bail out onto the highway. So I think it is about context and about your family culture. Somebody says at the beach. Oh, that'd be a great place to have these conversations. That sounds very fun and relaxing. Um, I know a lot of folks just have these serious conversations around the dinner table, or while they're shopping, because you can do other stuff. You don't have to have like an intense focus on the person. You can kind of like talk about it while doing your own stuff. Um, and then you can also find ways to introduce the subject too, by talking about, hey, what are your friends going through? Like, how are your friends how are your friends' relationships? Is anybody you know dating anybody? You can talk about stuff that they see at school, or news stories, current events. If you're watching shows together and dating violence or abuse is kind of a prevalent theme, you can turn to the young person and say, hey, what are you thinking about that? You can also use examples from your own life. If you've experienced dating violence, you can talk about that with your young person if you feel comfortable doing so. That might be really great about that might be a really great way to increase trust. Um, I love someone in the chat is saying, someone once told me to think about our approach. Are you a turtle or a shark when it comes to these big conversations? Okay, so are you shying away from the conversation, or are you going at it head on? That's a really interesting way to think about that. So yeah, setting the tone. It doesn't have to, not all of this has to be like serious soul sucking stuff. These can be fun, lighthearted, joyful talks. They don't have to be a serious conversation that you're all white knuckling it through together. No, relationships are great. Relationships are fun. Dating should be a fun, healthy, joyful experience. And so you want your conversational tone to reflect that. All right. So what do we talk about? First, we want to establish some shared definitions. So making sure that the young person you're talking with understands what goes into a healthy relationship for them, understands like what's the spectrum of behaviors from healthy to unhealthy to abusive, and what behaviors in a relationship are healthy, what behaviors are unhealthy, which ones are abusive. And you also want to make sure they know the warning signs of abuse so that they know what to look for in their own relationships, with their friends, so that they can look at a situation and say, that is something that is unhealthy, or ooh, that could be abusive, so that they know they have the language to say what is healthy or not, and they have the language that can tell them, okay, the feeling that I'm having that this isn't right, I know what that is now. You also want to talk to them about healthy communication, consent, figuring out what that means. You want to help them build empathy. And then also, what do they want to know? Maybe they know all of this stuff and they have questions about something else entirely, something else related to dating. So it's always important to ask your young person what they want to know as well, because this conversation is going to be useless if they already know everything that you're telling them. You want to make sure that the information you're providing is relevant. And then again, pro tip, do not try to cover all of this stuff at once. These are a series of ongoing conversations. We're not running a marathon. We're not like running a marathon in one shot. We are having like little mini sprints, separated by time and space for emotional processing. So I'm going to get into each of these conversation topics and just provide a couple of tips about what to say, how to say it, things they need to know. So the first one is, what goes into a healthy relationship? You can ask. I mean, all of these topics that you're going to talk about with your young person, ask them what they think. What do you think goes into a healthy relationship? What do you think are signs of a healthy relationship? So you can talk about trust, independence, making sure that you and your partner have time apart where you're not together all the time. Teamwork, that you're working together, that you're adaptable, that you're playful. And then on the right is a little relationship inventory that you can use, that anybody can use of any age to determine whether their relationship is healthy. This is a great little inventory that you can provide to your young person who's in a relationship, so they can say, yeah, I can ask myself these questions at any time so that I know, because my relationship might change over time, but I can ask myself all these questions, and then I can pinpoint the feeling I have about my relationship. So things like, does my partner encourage me to grow? Can I be myself with them? Is there equal give and take, or am I doing all the work? Stuff like that. And then you can also tell them about the relationship spectrum. All relationships exist on kind of a blurred spectrum of healthy, unhealthy, and abusive. And sometimes it can be hard to distinguish unhealthy relationship dynamics and behaviors from the abusive ones, because they kind of bleed into each other. And when we're learning relationships for the first time, we don't categorize them into these boxes. We don't watch our parents fight and say, yes, the way that they're arguing is unhealthy. We watch our parents fight and say, married people in relationships fight like this. This is what it looks like. We're not categorizing them when we're young. It's only as we grow, as we get older, and we see more relationships, we experience more types of relationships. That's when we start to be able to categorize these elements into healthy, unhealthy, or abusive. One that I really want to touch on, one behavior that I really want to touch on that can be unhealthy or abusive, that a lot of young people are getting into lately, is digital privacy. The idea that if somebody you're in a relationship says, hey, give me your phone so I can go through your texts, you have to just give it to them. I have heard of so many teenagers, so many young people lately just who have internalized the idea that they have to hand over their digital privacy to the person they're dating as a measure of trust or as a show of love. And that strikes me as super unhealthy. And it's unfortunately really common right now. So I would encourage you, when you're talking about the relationship behavior spectrum with young people, that you specifically mention digital privacy, because abusive tactics have evolved with the internet, and teenagers and young people need to know that they still have a right to privacy. Okay, so we've got the relationship spectrum. We talked about healthy relationship building blocks. Another thing you want to talk about with your young person is communication. What's healthy communication look like to them? How much communication is too much? Are they okay having their partner send them 30 text messages in a row? Is that okay for them? Or is that unhealthy? If they communicate mostly online, like if they're on, I don't know if they're on dating apps or if they're just texting people that they're in a relationship with rather than spending time face to face, I think it's really important to talk about tone. The fact that you can't always tell how somebody is, like what somebody's tone is or what they mean by what they're saying when they're texting. So much of your affect gets lost when you just are texting. And so making sure that they're at least taking time with the person they're dating or even their friends, to talk in person so they get a better sense of what this person's saying, and what they really mean. I also want to talk about sexting and image sharing, because it's happening. It's happening. And I know when I was a teenager and the adults in my life were telling me, oh, don't sext or don't post pictures on whatever, because once something's on the internet, you can't take it off the internet. And I used to kind of roll my eyes and be like, I know better than you, older person. But it's true. The stuff that you put on the internet cannot be easily scrubbed off the internet. Seriously. So it is really important that they understand, they don't have to do that stuff. If they're feeling pressured to send sexy pictures or sext, they don't have to. And also if they do, they need to know how to work to get that stuff taken away, because that can be a really upsetting way that abuse follows you around for the rest of your life. I'm going to take some questions from the Q&A feature now. somebody says, I've heard teen girls discuss how the possessiveness and jealousy is sexy, and it means that their partner, the boyfriend, really loves them. They believe that that's what love looks like. So how do we get through to girls in particular who associate love with possessiveness and jealousy? Um, that's so real. I know you mentioned Twilight in particular in this question. The fact that, like, in Twilight, love looks like possession and jealousy. I think it is really important just to be very clear about what you think. As an adult, as the adult in their life, you can say, well, yeah, I know you think that's cute, but here's what I see when I see somebody being possessive and jealous. My perspective is that they're trying to control my time or they don't respect my independence. You can be very clear about like what you think and hope that they accept it or that they some of that soaks in. Um, Unfortunately, you can't make a teenager believe anything. You just kind of have to plant seeds and hope that eventually something clicks. But you can be as honest as possible about the fact that you don't personally think that is like an okay way to show and express love. But what they do with that information is kind of up to them. All right. And then I want to talk about conflict in relationships too. When we're talking about communication, we're also talking about conflict. Young people might believe that there's no such thing as healthy conflict. If you're fighting, you should break up. And to some extent, that's true. If the relationship is new enough, if the fighting is constant and severe enough, yeah, probably best to just go your separate ways. But healthy conflict does exist. There are ways to disagree with people that are still kind, that are collaborative. There are ways to work through conflict with a partner that are healthy and good and that can bring you closer together in your relationship. So it's important to talk about that and ask them what healthy conflict might look like for them. Also, tell these young people that they don't have to put up with emotional and verbal abuse. They don't have to if somebody's boyfriend is putting them down and saying that they're too ugly or they're not good enough, or somebody's girlfriend is saying, "Oh, you're a bad person, you're a bad boyfriend," or like you should, I don't know, change everything, or you should kill yourself. Like that kind of stuff is abuse, and they don't have to put up with that. You don't. They deserve better. Young people in your life don't have to put up with verbal or emotional abuse. It's not okay. They shouldn't have to deal with that, and you can tell them that they do deserve better. Um, Somebody is asking whether the recording will be accessed later. Yes, you will get a link to the recording tomorrow. So yes, you're not going to miss anything. Another great resource when you're talking with young people about communication and healthy relationship behaviors is the Cool Not Cool quiz. I'm not going to go into it now, but it's a quiz put on by an organization that's similar to Love is Respect. And it goes through different relationship scenarios and talks about these different behaviors. And asks you to say whether something is cool, meaning it's like healthy and okay in a relationship, or whether it's not cool, meaning it's invasive or unhealthy or even downright abusive. So that's a really good tool. It's a really fun one. Actually, it's a really fun quiz to take with young people. So you can do that as part of this conversation too. And then we also want to talk about consent. Consider that the young person in your life might not know what specific behaviors constitute abuse, harassment, assault, or rape. They might not know because nobody's told them. Depending on what school they go to, they might not have access to consent-based sexual health and relationship education. So they might not know what these behaviors are. So when you're talking about consent, when you're talking about relationship and dating violence at all, you can ask them what they know first and then provide correct definitions as needed. Um, but it's really important to be talking about consent with young people. Um, Talking about the fact that it must be freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. It's like fries. Planned Parenthood has a really great acronym for that. Consent is like fries. Making sure that they know coercion is not consent. If you badger a person enough times to go out with you or have sex with you, if they say no first and then you just keep badgering them until you wear them down and they say yes, that's not consent, that's coercion. Everybody has the right to say no to a relationship, to a date, to a sexual act, to sexting or sharing pictures. Everybody's got the right to say no to that, and they have the right to have that no respected as well. One thing that's also really hard when as a teenager, when you're dating or trying to date somebody, is rejection. So like getting turned down if you ask somebody out, that can be devastating to a teenager. That's really hard on their self-esteem. But it's important to help the young people in your life respect that rejection. To say like, okay, that person has the right to say no to me, and I'm not gonna get mad at them for saying no. I can be upset with myself, sure, like I can be sad about it, but I'm not going to turn that on the other person because they have the right to say no. I also think about that in terms of breakups too. So breakups are also devastating, whether you're a teenager or an adult. I mean, breakups are really hard in adult life too. But it's important for young people to know that if somebody they're in a relationship with wants to break up, they get to break up. Unfortunately, breakups are a unilateral decision, and you can't force somebody to stay in a relationship with you just because you want to. That's a violation of consent. And then non-sexual situations also require consent. So what you can do as the adult in this young person's life is model asking for consent in a variety of interactions. Like, hey, is it okay if I take some of your fries? Is it okay if I like fold this part of your laundry? Would you want me to call this person for you? Can I sit here? Ask for consent in a whole bunch of ways so that they know that this is an everyday fact of life. Another really great way to look at consent, and maybe you've seen this, is that consent is like tea. So I'm going to show this brief video. You may have seen this before. I still think it's a really valuable tool. Yep. Yep. Let's play it. Just a moment. Okay. Hold on. I'm gonna see how I can do this. All right, I'm gonna stop screen sharing and then I'm gonna pull this up real quick. Ah. Oh my gosh, you guys, I am so sorry about this. Trying to pull this video up. All right, let me share. All right, here we go.
This is Lumen.
Nope.
The first device for
Sorry,
hacking your
folks.
If
Okay.
you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure." Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, "No thank you," then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please, that's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind, and you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they are safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it, going, "But you wanted tea last week," or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat, going, "But you wanted tea last night." If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you are able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to make myself a cup of tea.
All right. I love that video because it really does. It gets to the heart of it. The fact that unconscious people don't want tea. Yeah. All right, let me stop sharing and start sharing again. Thank you all for your patience as I navigate what should not be a new thing for me. I've been doing Zooms for a long time. I should know how to do this, but stuff happens. All right. Yeah, I really enjoy that particular video. I think it gets to the heart of the matter. Gets to the point very simply that like if consent is enthusiastic and affirmative, it is a yes. It is the presence of yes, I want tea, not the absence of no. And so you can show that video with to your young person. But I also want to talk about empathy. So we've talked about healthy relationships, consent, communication, but also I think empathy building is huge for people who are in that 13 to 18 bracket. Um, knowing and caring about what other people are feeling and thinking is really important, and that makes you a better person to be in a relationship with too. Um, I know peer pressure is a huge thing. A lot of teenagers, a lot of young people feel like they have to go along with jokes that maybe they don't like. Maybe they don't really think they're funny, but all their friends are laughing, so they're going to make the jokes and laugh anyway. But you can tell the young person that you care about in your life, like, hey, you're better than that. That joke wasn't funny, and you're better than it. So let's find some funnier ones. Um, I think it's also important to just very clearly shut down any sort of sexist behavior or norms, any minimization or rape jokes. I think it's really important to be very clear about shutting that down in the moment, even if they're a little bit embarrassed or feel a little sheepish about the fact that they said something that you didn't like and you shut it down. I think it's okay for you to say, hey, you're better than that, or hey, let's be kinder next time. It's also important to help the young people in your life understand other people's points of view. So ask what they're noticing about people. What do they think others are feeling based on their facial expressions or body language and tone? Um, so putting a label on people's feelings to help them understand and think about how other people are feeling. You can also be a positive role model for connecting with people by giving your full attention to this young person or to the people that you're around. That means putting down your phone, turning off the TV, putting your full attention on the person you're with so that they know that you expect that of them as well. Um, and also be kind to service workers. I know things are hard, times are tough. We're getting really like you can get really tense just by standing in line at Target, but don't take that out on the person who is working at Target because your young person is going to learn that from you that that's acceptable behavior as well. So you want to model those positive connections no matter who you're with or where you are, because the young person you love is watching and learning how to behave from you. And also make sure you're acknowledging their growth. So if they are learning empathy and kindness, if they're starting to stand up for other people in front of their friends, or if they're really showing a huge growth in their kindness, acknowledge that. Tell them, hey, you have been such a good listener lately, or you've been you've been really supportive. I've noticed you being really supportive of your friends who are going through a hard time. That's amazing. Keep up the good work. Recognize. It's really important. Young people want to feel seen for the work that they're doing, especially the hard internal work. Okay, so hopefully now you know what to talk about and how. But maybe you still can't imagine actually sitting down for these conversations. Um, but the pressure is off to get it all right and packed into one super tight conversation because we are playing the long game here. Um, we want long-term quality of relationships. We want connection. The goal of talking about dating violence and healthy relationships with young people is not to assert ourselves as experts. The goal is not to make sure our teenagers know everything right away. That's really short-sighted. We want connection. We want teenagers to feel seen, heard, and valued by us, feel like they're not being judged. We want stability over the long term. We want to lay the groundwork of a supportive relationship so that in times of struggle and confusion, when the young people we love are having a really hard time or going through a crisis, they aren't trying to do it alone. They will, we want to lay the groundwork so that they can trust us to be there for them when they need help. And this means work. I mean, cultivating a supportive relationship is not a passive act, it requires activity. Um, Maintaining trust depends on you demonstrating that you're trustworthy. Love is respect is really clear and really intentional about saying you can't just tell a teenager, hey, you can trust me with everything, unless you're backing that up with actions. Um, Trust depending on or showing that you're trustworthy means respecting their decision making even when you disagree. um, you can't force them to trust you. You can't force them to make a certain decision or leave a relationship that you don't like. You can't live their lives, but you can be a safe landing place for them. So we're going to talk about how to do that. It's really important to prepare yourself for the more sensitive conversations, to get ready on your own if you're suspecting that the young person in your life is experiencing abuse or is using abusive behaviors. If you need to express concern, it's important to get yourself ready first. So check in with yourself. How are you feeling about this? What's your stress level? Make sure that all that stuff is under control before you talk to this young person. Um, and it's really important if you're coming in with if you're coming in to tell this young person like, hey, I have noticed some behaviors that you're using that I don't like, I don't think are healthy. If you're trying to have that kind of conversation, it's important to keep your side of the street clean. So admit if you have done those things in the past, admit your mistakes or times that you've needed to grow. Um, and you may have to admit that some of the things that you've taught this young person might have contributed to their behavior. So make sure you're up on all of that. We are not trying to say do as I say, not as I do here anymore. Um, no, we want our words and our suggestions and recommendations for young people to be in line with our actions. And when they're not, we need to tell them why. So it's also important to check your ego. You might not have all the answers in this situation. Like you might not be correct, and that's okay. Um, it's also important to be aware of your biases. If you're going to have a conversation with a young person about um, behaviors that you're noticing in them that you're worried about, be aware of your biases. There are so many different reasons or motivations for a young person to do what they are doing. So don't assign motive before you know it. Ask them, hey, I've noticed you've been doing this lately. What's up with that? What's going on? Why are you doing that? No judgment. I just want to know. And then also think about your expectations for this young person. Because how you want them to react and how they're actually gonna react might be very different. And so what are you gonna do? How are you gonna accept them if your expectations differ from their reality? Um, I love the point in the chat about challenging sexist and misogynistic jokes with teenagers is having them explain why it's funny, because a lot of times that helps them understand that it's hurtful and inappropriate. I love that, and that's a really simple, non-judgmental way to say, "Hey, not okay." Is just to ask and express curiosity, which is also something we want to do when we're having what to cultivate supportive relationships with the young people in our lives. We want to center curiosity, validation, and collaboration. So, with curiosity, teenagers often feel like adults don't take them seriously. So, it's really important to ask them questions. A supportive relationship means showing them that you value what they have to say. So, if they say something you're unsure about, ask them to say more. Say more about that. Tell me more. How do you feel about this thing? How do you feel about this event that happened? What's going on in your internal world? Show that you really care about this young person and what they believe. You can also validate, especially if they're going through relationship violence or if they're having a hard time with their friendships or relationships. Don't dismiss them out of hand and say, oh, well, you're a teenager. It'll all get better when you go to college, or it'll all get better when you grow up. Don't even worry about it, because it's happening to them right now. So say stuff like, it's normal to be feeling that way. Like, I totally get why you would feel that way. You're not crazy for feeling like this or thinking this way. And then one of my favorite simple little things to say to young people is, I believe you. A lot of times they feel like adults don't take them seriously or don't think they're being truthful, or adults think that they're making a big deal out of something that shouldn't be a big deal. But you can be someone who tells this young person, I believe what you are telling me. I believe that this thing that you're going through is as difficult for you as you say it is. That's really important. That's huge for a young person's self-esteem, is to be told that they're believed, that they're accepted, that their feelings are valid. And then collaboration. So we want to be working together to find solutions, especially especially if a young person is coming to you to say, hey, I experienced abuse, or like my partner is being violent. If a young person is coming to you with an issue or a disclosure, don't automatically rush to fix everything and say, okay, we're getting you a protective order, we're taking you away from this person, we're getting you somewhere safe. Don't take over. What you can do instead is ask, well, what have you tried? What's worked for you? What do you want to do? Like, what do you want out of this situation? What do you think about trying this thing? Making sure that the young people you love and are working with are agents of change in their own lives. Because so much of being a teenager is having your choices questioned, is having your choices taken away from you, or having your autonomy taken away from you. So you can be a person who gives some of that back. You can be a person who says, hey, yeah, this is a problem. Let's figure this out together. I'll be the person who is bigger and stronger and might have more experience than you, but I am here to help figure out what you want. I'm here to help you help yourself. I'm here to help you explore things that might work for you. I'm here to help you access safety in the way that you want to access safety. We're being collaborative. We're not gonna immediately go into rescue mode. We're gonna say, hey, we're on a team here, and that team is team you. What does team you want to do? Okay. And then when you're responding to disclosure, a lot of times, I mean, for youth workers and teachers especially, young people are going to come to you and say, hey, I'm experiencing dating violence, or my partner is being really controlling, or my partner is asking me to do stuff that I don't want to do. And it's really hard for adults to hear that, because we want to believe that the young people that we love are safe and being taken care of. It's really hard when that's not the case. So here are a couple of tips that we've come up with at Women's Advocates for how to respond when a young person discloses to you that they might be experiencing something unsafe or experiencing relationship violence. And the first thing is to start by believing, is to trust that the young person who's coming to you is not making this stuff up. So don't ask, well, are you sure that happened? Are you sure they meant it that way? Are you sure they did that because, was there a reason? Did you do, no. Just start by believing. Say, I believe you. I'm sorry that happened. And then we want to center empowerment, like somebody said in the chat. It's their decision. So we're centering self-determination. We're not going to try and control what they do. We want to allow the young people that we work with to make up their own minds about how they want to proceed. And sometimes they don't want to, especially if a teenager comes to you and says, I'm in an abusive relationship, or my partner is abusing or threatening me. A lot of times what we want to do, our first instinct is to say, okay, we're going to break up. You're going to break up with them, right? You're going to get out of this relationship. But when we chase a specific outcome, we become the controlling party in the young person's life. So what we want to do is promote their overall safety. Figure out how they can be safe outside of leaving the relationship, because sometimes that's not possible, especially in high school. If you break up with an abusive person, you still have to see them in class the next day. And so what can we do to keep this young person safe while they still might be in constant contact with the person who's abusing them? And part of that is asking what they want to happen. So what's the young person's desired outcome? Yeah, what end game do you want? Like someone's saying in the chat, what would the end point look like? If you got everything you wanted, what would that look like? And do your best to help them get there. Sometimes what a young person wants is just to switch classes so they don't have to see this person anymore. Maybe they want referral to a therapist. maybe they don't want to break up. They just want this person to change. And that's when you can kind of work with them to provide them resources for that. But yeah, asking what they want instead of just assuming that you know what is best. Yeah, and maybe what they need is somebody just to listen to them and say, "Man, I'm sorry you're going through that. That sounds awful. I mean, I'm here for you." Maybe they don't want any specific outcome. They just want to be heard. So we're focusing on supporting them, on being here for them, not saving them, not whisking them away to some magical place where dating violence isn't going to touch them. We're not going to punish them for disclosing to us in the first place. We just want to be there. I do want to touch on mandated reporting because sometimes building trust with young people is really hard. Building rapport with teenagers who don't trust easy to begin with is really hard. And then if we do have to report an instance of abuse or violence, that can really damage any sort of rapport and trust that we've built beforehand. So be very clear with the young people that you're working with about your status as a mandated reporter, if you are one. And then if you do have to report, be really collaborative. Be very transparent, help them, assure them that of exactly what is going to happen throughout the process, and be as collaborative as possible in that reporting process, whether that's reporting with them, whether that is, I don't know. I don't know what that always looks like, but it is about just not springing a report onto a young person. So be transparent, be very clear about what's going to happen and why. And try and do it with their blessing. I mean, you have to do it anyway, but it's important to get their blessing as well. But also as an adult, it can be really hard to hear this disclosure. I mean, what's harder still is to have experienced it, experienced the thing that you're disclosing about. But disclosure is hard on everybody, and there is support available for adults who need to process a young person having disclosed to them. You can go to the domestic violence hotline. You can go to Love is Respect. There are a whole bunch of different resources for people who have been disclosed to and need somewhere to process that information. Some additional recommendations I have for working with young people, for talking about healthy relationships with young people, is to admit when you don't know something. Don't pretend like you have all the answers. Definitely don't make something up. And if you don't know something or the answer to the question that they asked you, you can say, "Hey, I'm not quite sure, but let's figure it out together. Let's look up the answer together." Be collaborative. Take them seriously, please. Like they're not just unbaked adults. Teenagers aren't just like little pieces of bread dough that are going to turn into fully fledged bread adults someday. They are fully fledged people. So take them seriously. You remember being a teenager. It's hard. It's hard to feel like you're not taken seriously. So try to do that for the young people in your life. And then these conversations and talking about dating violence and assault and healthy relationships, like this is intense stuff. So tensions can run high. If emotions are really high, if you feel activated, if the young person feels activated or escalated, you can take a time out. You can say, "Hey, we're both getting really in our feelings right now. I think we can take 20 minutes, go for a walk, cool down, and then let's come back to this." You don't have to bust through the conversation just because you started it. You can stop and take a break and come back. That is more than okay. So those are just some additional recommendations that don't necessarily fit into another neat box. But finally, I just want to say this, I mean, ending teen dating violence is not just on teenagers. It takes all of us. It takes all of us choosing and modeling healthy behaviors rather than abusive ones. It means that we all have a role to play to believe survivors and shift the culture away from victim blaming. It means that we have to hold people who are using abusive behaviors accountable, help them find options to change their behaviors and beliefs. And it's really important. This is the thing that we're doing now, is that we need to model, educate, and discuss healthy relationship dynamics. So we need to, if we're going to talk to young people about how to have a healthy relationship, we need to make sure that we're having healthy relationships ourselves, because they're not going to learn from our words if our actions don't match them. So it's really important to make sure our sides of the street are clean as well. There are a whole bunch of programs that have great resources for young people in the Twin Cities, Minnesota area. One of them is Tubman. They have something called the Inspiring Youth Program, which is a 6-week program for youth who are interested in being healthy relationship ambassadors for their peers. It's a great program. I've put the link to sign any of your young people up for that program on this slide, so you'll get that later. Another resource from the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault is the Healthy Relationships Guidebook. It is a concrete toolkit. It's a digital toolkit for parents and guardians about having these sorts of conversations with young people. So it's like a written version of this presentation. And actually, next week, MNCOS is going to have a webinar about going through this workbook, going through the guidebook, and having conversations on healthy relationships. So if you want to sign up for that webinar, we'll have a link to do so in the follow-up to this webinar that you'll get in your email. There's a parent guide from Love is Respect about how to engage with young people about dating violence. Another great resource is Scarlet Teen, which is sex and relationship education for young people. They are great. They are super accessible. All of the language they use to talk about sex and sexuality and relationship violence is really clear cut and developmentally appropriate. It's a great resource for young people who need a safe place to learn about sexuality and relationships and healthy relationship education. I've got the cool, not cool quiz here, the hotline, and Love is Respect, all that good stuff. So you'll have access to all of this information when we send it out tomorrow. But thank you so much for being here and for your commitment to supporting young people. It's really hard. It's really hard to have these conversations. They can be really scary. So I'm hoping that I've given you some tools and some recommendations for how to work with young people who might be experiencing relationship violence. But I want to take this time to answer any questions that you might have in the chat. And I'll go through the Q&A feature to see if you have questions as well. But yeah, does anybody have specific questions that you can think of about dating violence or working with teenagers? I'll give you a little time to type those up or think of them while I open the Q&A. Someone in the Q&A is asking, any tips for working with youth whose parents forbid them from dating at all, or tips for working with the parents? That's a really hard question because what I have found, like just in my lived experience of having been a teenager and having gone to high school, is that youth whose parents forbid them from dating are probably gonna date anyway. So so I don't really know what else to say except if you're a youth worker, just give them as much safe information as you can about how to date safely, um, how to have a healthy relationship because I mean they're probably going to do it whether their parents know about it or not. Um, that's that's really all I have to say on that is they're probably going to date and parents might not like that. Um, but they're teenagers. It's probably going to happen. So just acknowledge, like, helping parents acknowledge the fact that, like, what you would like your teenager to do or how you would like your teenager to behave is probably not going to be in line with what they actually do or behave or how they actually behave. Um, and yeah, someone in the chat saying, yeah, the more you restrict dating, the more they'll want to just hide it. So if you can contribute to that culture of openness um, with your teenagers, that would be really helpful. Just say like, hey, I'm not gonna forbid you from doing this stuff. I just need you to know that you can come to me with questions. Yeah, heavy restrictions make for sneaky kids. I was one too. I was a sneaky kid because there were a lot of rules. Here's our post-webinar information. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's a webinar survey. You'll get an email later with a recording to this webinar. I'm going to stop recording.